December 19, 1944. The Ardennes forest lies buried under heavy snow. The trees bowed beneath its weight. A brittle wind cuts across the frozen ground, carrying the distant rumble of artillery, the sharp crack of gunfire echoing like distant thunder. Mud-choked roads twist through dense pine, their paths barely visible beneath the white drifts. Soldiers stumble through the cold, faces streaked with grime, breath crystallizing in the icy air, engines strain, tires spinning uselessly, leaving tracks that vanish almost immediately under falling snow. In a command post a few miles back, a map lies spread across a wooden table. Pins mark villages under siege, lines showing advancing German units, and a single arrow points to Bastogne. Orders scribbled in haste bear one message: relieve the encircled. Some call it impossible. 300 miles of winter-clogged roads, frozen forests, enemy forces entrenched on every ridge, and yet the man standing there, Patton, scans the map. Eyes steely and voice calm, almost certain the 101st Airborne at Bastogne will not fall. And so begins a march that would shock the world. By December 1944, the war in Western Europe seemed to be entering its final act. The Allies had liberated much of France after the Normandy landings in June, pushing German forces back through Belgium and into the German borderlands. The United States Third Army, under General George S. Patton, had stormed across northern France, racing faster than planners could anticipate, capturing key towns and cutting vital supply lines. Patton's reputation for audacious maneuvers and rapid advances was already legendary among Allied commanders and soldiers alike. Yet despite this momentum, the situation remained precarious. German forces, though battered, retained the ability to strike with devastating surprise. Intelligence reports in early December hinted at unusual troop movements in the Ardennes forest, a quiet, densely wooded region in eastern Belgium and Luxembourg, but few expected the scale of what was about to unfold. The Ardennes had long been considered a quiet sector, unsuitable for major offensives. Allied planners assumed it a natural barrier against a large-scale German push. On December 16, 1944, those assumptions would be shattered. In the pre-dawn hours, under the cover of dense fog and freezing mist, German units of the 6th Panzer Army and 5th Panzer Army launched Operation Wacht am Rhein, a massive surprise offensive through the Ardennes. Over 200,000 men, supported by 1,000 tanks and artillery units, pushed forward with the goal of splitting the Allied front, capturing Antwerp, and forcing a negotiated peace. The assault exploited the element of surprise, taking advantage of poor weather that grounded Allied aircraft and hindered communications. Allied units were immediately caught off guard. Thinly spread American divisions, many in quiet sectors expecting little combat, suddenly faced the shock of concentrated armored attacks. Villages along the forest roads were overrun before reinforcements could arrive. Supply lines were severed. Radio silence and confusion added to the chaos. For troops on the ground, the world had shifted overnight from a relatively stable front to a sudden life-or-death struggle. In the midst of this unfolding crisis, the town of Bastogne became a critical focal point. Located at a key crossroads in southern Belgium, it offered access to major highways essential for the German push toward the Meuse River and ultimately Antwerp. The 201st Airborne Division, fresh from months of intense training and combat in Europe, found itself surrounded, low on supplies, and facing superior enemy numbers. Snowbound roads slowed reinforcements, and the winter conditions made each mile treacherous. Soldiers huddled in foxholes, rationing ammunition and food, praying the lines would hold long enough for help to arrive. Meanwhile, Patton, commanding the U.S. Third Army to the south, had just completed a rapid advance through France. His forces were dispersed, refueling and resupplying after weeks of continuous movement. Reports of the Ardennes breakthrough reached him in the early morning hours of December 17. Many commanders might have hesitated, calculating that the weather, terrain, and enemy strength made any counterattack impossible. But Patton saw the situation differently. In his mind, speed was the weapon, audacity the shield. Delays would allow the Germans to consolidate and break through. A rapid, decisive maneuver could reverse the tide. Logistical challenges were enormous. Snow and ice clogged narrow forest roads. Vehicles became mired in mud. Fuel was limited. Tanks and trucks, critical for transporting infantry and supplies, risked mechanical failure under extreme cold. Communication lines were unreliable. Yet Patton ordered his staff to prepare an unprecedented forced march. The directive was clear. Within 48 hours, Third Army units would be on the move. racing to relieve Bastogne before it fell. By nightfall, men of Patton's staff worked feverishly. Maps were spread across tables, routes plotted with pins and chalk. Engineers calculated bridge crossings. Quartermasters estimated fuel needs. Commanders coordinated tank battalions and infantry regiments, ensuring each unit could move at maximum speed despite the obstacles. Every officer understood the stakes. The success of this march could determine not just the fate of a town, but the trajectory of the entire Ardennes campaign. And yet, despite careful planning, there remained a tension between ambition and reality. The Ardennes offensive had thrown the Allies into disarray. German forces were seasoned, motivated, and strategically positioned. Patton's bold plan would require not just speed, but flawless execution, discipline under extreme conditions, and a willingness to embrace risks most commanders would avoid. The question lingered in the minds of officers and men alike. Could a march of hundreds of miles in winter under enemy fire truly succeed? In the hours before the Third Army's engines roared to life, the Ardennes lay quiet, deceptive in its snow-covered stillness. Soldiers on both sides prepared for what would become one of the most remarkable feats of rapid maneuver in modern military history. From the frozen forest floors to the command posts stacked with maps and orders, the stage was set for a gamble that would shock friend and foe alike. The snow fell heavier as midnight approached, blanketing the Ardennes in silence. Yet beneath that quiet movement was stirring. In a matter of hours, Patton's columns would begin to advance. Every frozen mile, every engine churned through mud and ice would carry the promise of salvation or the specter of disaster. And at the heart of it all, the fate of Bastogne awaited. Bastogne, a small Belgian town of narrow cobbled streets and stout stone buildings, suddenly became the epicenter of one of the war's most desperate battles. By December 17, German armored divisions had encircled the town, cutting off the 101st Airborne from reinforcements and supplies. Roads leading in were clogged with snow, debris, and abandoned vehicles, while the enemy's advance had claimed bridges and crossroads, making any relief operation extraordinarily difficult. The Americans inside Bastogne faced freezing temperatures, limited rations, and a constant barrage of artillery and sniper fire. The 101st's paratroopers were trained, disciplined, and resilient, but the psychological weight of isolation was immense. Cut off from the rest of the Allied lines, surrounded by a larger, better-equipped enemy, their position seemed almost hopeless. Yet they held. Lieutenant Colonel William "Bud" Miley and other junior officers circulated through the foxholes, boosting morale, distributing ammunition, and reinforcing defensive positions. Every man understood that survival depended on endurance and the hope of reinforcements, a hope that now rested entirely on Patton, far to the south. Patton's headquarters in Nancy, France was a hub of urgent activity. The Third Army had been advancing along multiple axes, capturing towns and securing supply routes after weeks of continuous operations. Divisions were spread thin, fatigued by winter's cold and the relentless pace of maneuver warfare. Yet Patton refused to pause. Upon receiving the reports of Bastogne's encirclement, he immediately convened his senior officers. Maps were unfurled across tables. Pins and colored chalk marked roads, rivers, and enemy positions. Every obstacle was scrutinized. Narrow forest paths, frozen rivers, destroyed bridges, and the ever-present risk of German ambushes. Patton's planning style was as relentless as it was precise. He understood the harsh arithmetic of speed versus risk. Delays, even for careful reconnaissance, could allow the Germans to consolidate and crush the town. He famously remarked that a commander must act decisively, even under uncertainty, trusting in the mobility, discipline, and resilience of his troops. In practice, this meant issuing orders that many would have considered reckless, a forced march of over 100 miles in 48 hours in the dead of winter, with enemy forces positioned along every major road. Logistical preparations were nearly as formidable as the tactical ones. Fuel had to be rationed carefully, while trucks and tanks required constant maintenance to prevent engine freezes. Ammunition, rations, and medical supplies were packed for the arduous journey. Engineers inspected roads and bridges, identifying choke points and planning for quick repairs or alternative routes. Even the weather, unpredictable and harsh, was treated as an operational factor rather than an insurmountable barrier. Crews were briefed to keep moving through snow, ice, and darkness, often working through exhaustion and frostbite. Meanwhile, German forces assumed that Bastogne was effectively isolated. The enemy underestimated Patton's willingness to undertake a high-risk maneuver, Assuming Allied command would opt for caution, German intelligence, hampered by Allied radio discipline in the fog of war, did not anticipate a relief column moving at such speed through winter-clogged roads. Patton's decision to strike rapidly would exploit this miscalculation, turning the element of surprise against the Germans themselves. Within Bastogne, soldiers felt both despair and determination. They knew that time was their enemy, that each hour without relief increased the chance of being overrun. At the same time, the distant sound of engines and the knowledge that Third Army was on the move offered a fragile glimmer of hope. Patton's reputation preceded him. Stories of his swift, audacious advances had filtered through Allied lines, giving soldiers the sense that help was not just possible, but imminent. By the morning of December 18, Patton's forces were ready to begin. Tanks rumbled to life. Tracked vehicles groaned under their frozen burdens, and infantry loaded supplies onto jeeps and trucks. Officers issued final orders emphasizing coordination and speed. Every mile would test men and machines alike. Every ridge and wooded pass carried the risk of enemy ambush, and yet the Third Army moved forward, engines cutting through the snow, guns ready, eyes set on Bastogne. The stage was now fully set. Bastogne, encircled and under siege, awaited relief. Patton's audacious 48-hour march, unprecedented in speed and daring, was about to commence. Every decision, every frozen mile, would determine whether a town and the lives of its defenders would survive the German onslaught. For the soldiers of Patton's Third Army, the Ardennes in December 1944 was a landscape of extremes. The cold was relentless. Temperatures plunged well below freezing, turning breath into ice and freezing fingers inside gloves. Snow and mud combined into a relentless sucking mire along the forest roads, slowing tanks and trucks to a crawl. Exhaustion weighed heavily on infantrymen who had been marching, fighting, and hauling supplies for weeks. Sleep was rare. Meals were sparse, but human body was tested as never before. Frostbite, fatigue, and hunger were constant companions. Yet amid the harsh conditions, morale remained surprisingly resilient. Patton's presence and audacity inspired a sense of purpose. Soldiers knew that their rapid movement was not reckless chaos, but a calculated strike aimed at saving the surrounded 101st Airborne in Bastogne. Letters home, journal entries, and oral histories recount the grim determination of these men. They trudged through snow, engines roaring, tracks breaking through ice, convinced that the lives of comrades depended on their speed. Fear was ever present, but it was tempered by resolve. Each mile covered, each frozen hill crest gained, reinforced a shared conviction that they were part of something extraordinary. Patton's leadership style was as relentless as it was legendary. He combined meticulous planning with bold, often audacious, decision-making. Unlike many commanders, he did not hesitate in the face of uncertainty. Instead, he thrived on it. When intelligence suggested that the Ardennes offensive might be contained by caution, Patton chose speed and surprise. He understood that decisive action could exploit enemy assumptions and turn the tide in a matter of hours. His staff operated with precision. Orders were issued clearly, responsibilities defined, and contingencies considered. Yet Patton also left room for initiative at lower levels, trusting officers and non-commissioned officers to adapt to conditions on the ground. This balance of control and flexibility was crucial during the 48-hour march. What a column of tanks encountered impassable ice or a blocked bridge, junior officers quickly improvised alternate routes, keeping the momentum alive. Patton's leadership was not merely about issuing orders. It was about creating an environment where speed, decisiveness, and adaptability could flourish simultaneously. The march itself was a feat of logistics and mechanized warfare. Tanks, trucks, and half-tracks moved in long, grinding columns along narrow forest roads. Cold weather stressed engines and transmissions, threatening mechanical failure at every mile. Diesel fuel gelled in extreme temperatures, tires froze, and tracks slipped over ice, creating the constant danger of immobilization. Engineers worked tirelessly to clear obstacles, repair bridges, and keep the supply lines moving. Communications technology also played a critical role. Radios were limited, often unreliable in the snow-laden forest, but signal units relayed crucial information between forward reconnaissance parties and Patton's headquarters. Orders had to be transmitted, sometimes shouted across frozen fields, sometimes delivered by jeep or motorcycle courier. Coordination between infantry, armor, and artillery units demanded precision. One miscommunication could stall the entire column and allow German forces to exploit the delay. Weaponry, too, shaped the march. Sherman tanks, equipped for cold weather operation, provided mobile firepower, suppressing enemy ambushes along the way. Artillery units moved forward as quickly as roads allowed, providing covering fire against entrenched German positions. Infantrymen carried not only their rifles but also essential equipment to repair vehicles, clear roads, and assist their comrades. The technology was only as effective as the men operating it, and in the freezing Ardennes, human endurance and mechanical reliability were inseparable. Together, these perspectives, human leadership and technological, paint a picture of extraordinary effort. Soldiers pushed beyond ordinary limits, guided by Patton's audacity and supported by mechanized might. Yet even with these advantages, success was not guaranteed. Terrain, enemy disposition, and timing remained constant threats. The next angle, the tactical one, will reveal how Patton's audacious plan navigated these dangers, exploiting weaknesses in the German offensive and achieving the impossible. The Ardennes offensive challenged traditional tactics. Roads were narrow, winding, and often snow-clogged. German forces controlled key crossroads, bridges, and high ground, giving them strong defensive positions. Patton's solution was not conventional frontal assault. It was speed itself, a tactical weapon. By moving rapidly along multiple routes, Third Army units could bypass the strongest German positions, striking where the enemy least expected. Reconnaissance played a critical role. Scouts moved ahead, mapping obstacles, enemy patrols, and impassable ice-covered bridges. Infantry units were prepared to clear snow, repair roads, and secure choke points. Tanks and artillery advanced on parallel paths, ready to provide suppressive fire against any German resistance. This coordination demanded near-perfect timing. Delays in one column could create gaps exploited by the enemy. Yet even in the chaos of winter, Patton's forces maintained momentum. Each mile gained shifted the tactical balance. German units, expecting slow Allied reinforcement, was suddenly confronted with armored columns racing toward Bastogne. By exploiting speed, terrain knowledge, and coordinated firepower, Patton turned seemingly insurmountable obstacles into a series of calculated advances. The Germans, confident in their initial success, were caught off guard by the Third Army's rapid response. Intelligence had failed to anticipate Patton's audacity. German commanders assumed the town of Bastogne would remain isolated for days, allowing their forces to consolidate and push toward Antwerp. They underestimated both the resilience of the 101st Airborne and Patton's capacity to move troops through impossible conditions. This miscalculation proved costly. German units, deployed across frozen forests and snowbound roads, had to split attention between advancing toward strategic objectives and countering the sudden arrival of Third Army columns. Armored divisions, tanks, and mechanized infantry were forced into hasty defensive maneuvers, often without sufficient reconnaissance. Communication lines were stretched thin, and the fog of war literally in the misty Ardennes mornings compounded confusion. German morale, initially high due to their surprise attack, began to waver as Patton's forces pressed closer. Soldiers entrenched along key roadways were faced with the unexpected sight of tanks cresting ridges and infantry moving relentlessly, unrelenting despite exhaustion and freezing temperatures. The shock of an Allied force moving faster than anticipated disrupted command structures and slowed offensive operations, buying critical time for Bastogne's defenders. Perhaps the most profound impact of Patton's march was psychological. For the men of the 101st Airborne, besieged in Bastogne, the knowledge that Third Army was moving at unprecedented speed was more than strategic. It was inspirational. Letters, diaries, and post-war accounts describe a renewed sense of hope, a belief that survival was possible even against overwhelming odds. The mere sound of distant engines, glimpses of armored columns cresting snowy hills, boosted morale and reinforced the determination to hold the town. On the German side, the unexpected speed and coordination of the Allied relief effort created doubt. Troops who had anticipated an easy capture of Bastogne suddenly found themselves facing fresh enemy forces operating with astonishing efficiency. Commanders were forced to rethink their strategy, divert resources, and anticipate attacks where none had been expected. Fear and confusion seeped into the ranks, undermining confidence in the initially brilliant offensive. Psychologically, the march showcased a timeless truth of warfare. Bold, decisive action can shift the perception of strength. Patton's audacity not only moved men and machines, but also altered minds, enemy and ally alike, reinforcing the notion that leadership, courage, and speed could overcome even the most daunting challenges. December 18, 1944, 0400 hours. Engines roared to life across the Third Army's staging areas in Nancy and Metz. Tanks, trucks, and half-tracks shuddered under layers of ice and snow, their crews bundled against the bitter Ardennes winter. Soldiers gripped rifles and gear, adrenaline mingling with dread. The march ahead was not just long, it was nearly impossible. Over 100 miles of frozen forest roads clogged with snow and mud separated Patton's columns from the besieged town of Bastogne. The first miles were deceptively calm. Snow crunched beneath the treads of armored vehicles. Ice cracked under the weight of jeeps. Scouts moved ahead, probing for obstacles, relaying warnings back to forward units. Every fork in the road, every ridge could conceal German positions, artillery nests, machine gun teams, or ambush squads lying in wait. Patton's strategy relied on speed and coordination. The columns could not stop, could not slow, lest the enemy detect the advance and react. By mid-morning, the first resistance appeared. A German patrol had established a hidden checkpoint along a narrow road through the forest. Sherman tanks rolled forward, hatches rattling, guns trained on the tree line. Infantry dismounted quickly, moving in sync with armored support. The engagement was brief but fierce. Small arms fire cracked across snow, and the tank's cannons roared, shaking the trees. By noon, the patrol was neutralized, but the encounter left a reminder. The Ardennes would resist at every turn. Communication was relentless. Radio operators shouted over static and wind, coordinating movements across miles of forest. When a supply truck became mired in mud, engineers and infantrymen labored to free it, sometimes working in freezing water up to their knees. Time was unforgiving. Every delay risked the collapse of the plan. Patton himself, though rarely seen at the front lines, monitored progress through maps and messenger reports, adjusting columns and rerouting units with precision. As evening fell, the march pressed onward. Snowfall thickened, reducing visibility to mere meters. Headlights cut through the whiteness, illuminating frozen ditches and the occasional abandoned German vehicle. Some troops moved along icy embankments, their boots slipping with each step. Tanks ground slowly over snow-packed roads, tracks straining against the ice. Despite the cold and fatigue, morale remained high. Soldiers knew that their movement was more than logistics. It was hope. Bastogne awaited, and with it, the knowledge that lives hung in the balance. Night brought new challenges. Frostbite claimed fingers and ears. Engines threatened to stall in the sub-zero temperatures. German artillery occasionally flared in the distance, illuminating the snow with brief, violent bursts of light. Yet the Third Army pressed on, column after column, maintaining speed and cohesion. Leadership at every level proved vital. Platoon commanders motivated exhausted men, while tank crews navigated treacherous roads under fire. The human element, discipline, courage, and relentless determination was as critical as the mechanized force itself. By the early hours of December 19, some units had covered more than 50 miles in less than 24 hours, a pace unheard of in modern warfare, especially under winter conditions. The Germans, expecting a slow, cautious advance, now faced the shock of speed. Patrols reported tank silhouettes appearing over ridgelines in impossible locations. Enemy units were forced to redeploy, abandoning some positions, while others hastily erected defensive lines that would soon be overrun. The audacity of the march had begun to pay dividends. Reconnaissance units scouted Bastogne's approaches. From a ridge, a young lieutenant glimpsed smoke curling above the town, artillery flashes punctuating the horizon. The 101st Airborne's defenders were still under siege, but relief was near. Patton's columns, relentless and precise, had traversed frozen forests, snowbound roads, and enemy resistance to approach the besieged town. By mid-morning, December 19, the vanguard of Patton's force crested a ridge overlooking Bastogne. Tanks rumbled forward, engines straining, their guns trained toward enemy positions just outside the town. Infantry advanced in sync, moving through snowdrifts and debris-strewn roads. For the first time in over 48 hours, the defenders of Bastogne could see the hope they had clung to. The long-awaited relief was arriving. The stage was set for the final confrontation, breaking the siege, coordinating with airborne troops, and confronting German units entrenched around the crossroads. Every decision, every shot fired, would determine whether this audacious march would succeed or end in catastrophic failure. December 19, 1944, 1,000 hours. The snow-laden streets of Bastogne trembled with the distant rumble of approaching armor. Soldiers of the 101st Airborne, exhausted from days of encirclement, froze at the sound of engines slicing through the silence. Through the gray winter haze, the first Shermans crested a ridge, their green and gray hulls stark against the white landscape. Relief had arrived. the advance was not unchallenged. German forces entrenched around the town's perimeter fired sporadically, hoping to slow the Allies' progress. Tanks and infantry of the Third Army responded with disciplined coordination. Sherman guns boomed, sending steel and smoke into enemy positions. Artillery units, positioned along the flanks, delivered suppressive fire, forcing German soldiers to take cover. Infantry moved forward alongside armored columns, clearing roadblocks, securing buildings, and protecting supply lines. Every movement was precise. Hesitation could allow the enemy to regroup. Inside Bastogne, the reaction was one of disbelief and elation. Paratroopers emerged from foxholes and ruined buildings, cheering as the familiar roar of Allied engines grew closer. Letters, diaries, and post-war accounts described the sudden, almost surreal, relief. Men who had endured cold, hunger, and artillery barrages now saw the steel and firepower of Third Army cutting through the snow like a promise fulfilled. Morale surged instantly. What had seemed a desperate, isolated position transformed into a connected, reinforced stronghold. The tactical coordination between Patton's forces and the airborne defenders was immediate and effective. Units linked, forming a continuous front that pushed German forces back from Bastogne's outskirts. Engineers repaired bridges and cleared roads to allow further reinforcements and supplies to flow into the town. Tanks took positions to secure strategic intersections, while infantry units patrolled side streets to flush out remaining pockets of resistance. Communication was constant. Messengers, radios, and signals ensured that Third Army movements synchronized with Bastogne's defenders, turning the chaotic siege into an organized countermeasure. German commanders, confronted by this sudden, decisive action, faced confusion and mounting pressure. Their calculations had assumed Bastogne would remain isolated, allowing the town to fall and key crossroads to open for further advance. Patton's rapid arrival forced a sudden reassessment. Units that had been preparing for an orderly siege now scrambled into defensive postures, trying to block the Allied advance while still holding other objectives. The psychological impact was profound. Confidence eroded, hesitation increased, and small mistakes compounded under pressure. By late afternoon, the siege was effectively broken. The 101st Airborne received much-needed supplies, food, ammunition, medical equipment, and the town's perimeter was reinforced by the mechanized might of Patton's columns. German positions around Bastogne were pressured on multiple fronts, forcing retreats or surrenders. Casualties among Third Army units were significant, but each mile covered and each German resistance overcome had validated the audacity of the 48-hour march. What had begun as a desperate gamble now became a decisive turning point in the Ardennes campaign. The human impact was undeniable. Soldiers of the 101st, once cornered and isolated, now fought with renewed vigor, bolstered by the sight of tanks rolling down streets they had defended for days. Exhausted men of the Third Army, having traversed freezing roads and forested obstacles, felt the satisfaction of accomplishing the impossible. Officers and enlisted alike understood the historical magnitude of what they had achieved, a march that defied conventional military wisdom, that combined speed, leadership, and coordination to alter the course of battle. By nightfall, Bastogne was secure. German forces, disoriented and pressured, withdrew to secondary defensive lines, their offensive momentum blunted. The relief of the town did not end the Battle of the Bulge, but it marked a critical turning point. Patton's audacious maneuver demonstrated that speed, decisiveness, and leadership could overcome even the most daunting obstacles. The success was not the result of chance. It was the convergence of human endurance, mechanized power, and audacious planning executed with precision under the harshest conditions imaginable. In the Ardennes that night, the snow continued to fall. Silent trees bore witness to a remarkable feat. A town saved, a siege broken, and a commander whose willingness to gamble had altered the course of battle. The 48-hour march had shocked both friend and foe. For Bastogne, for the 104th Airborne, and for the Third Army, it was a moment of triumph born from determination, ingenuity, and unyielding courage. The snow-covered streets of Bastogne bore silent testimony to the battle's intensity. Buildings were scarred by artillery, vehicles abandoned in frozen ditches, and streets littered with debris from both German and American operations. For the men of the 101st Airborne, the arrival of Patton's Third Army marked not only physical relief but also a psychological turning point. Supplies flowed in, ammunition, medical kits, food, and warm clothing. Soldiers who had endured near starvation and frostbite could finally rest, regroup, and regain strength. The siege, which had seemed insurmountable just days before, was broken. Casualties, however, were heavy. American losses in Bastogne numbered in the thousands, with paratroopers suffering injuries and exposure-related illnesses alongside battle wounds. German casualties were similarly significant, as units entrenched around the town faced relentless fire from coordinated Allied assaults. Many vehicles, including tanks and trucks immobilized by snow and ice, were abandoned or destroyed, further straining German logistical operations. Yet, despite the cost, the successful relief of Bastogne demonstrated that speed, coordination, and decisive leadership could overcome even overwhelming adversity. Strategically, the relief had immediate consequences. Bastogne's crossroads were vital for movement through the Ardennes. By securing the town, Patton's forces denied the Germans the ability to consolidate and continue their offensive toward Antwerp. The German advance, once rapid and threatening to split the Allied front, was halted. The Ardennes, long considered a quiet sector, had become a proving ground for the ingenuity and endurance of Allied forces. The Third Army's rapid maneuver not only stabilized the front but also allowed for a counteroffensive in the days that followed, gradually pushing German forces back. Morale across the Allied lines improved markedly. Soldiers elsewhere in the Ardennes drew inspiration from the audacity of Patton's march. News of Bastogne's relief spread quickly, providing tangible proof that even under dire circumstances, decisive action could reverse the course of battle. Letters and diaries from paratroopers and infantrymen alike describe a profound sense of relief and renewed determination. The psychological effect of seeing reinforcements arrive, moving faster than anyone had deemed possible, was almost as critical as the material aid itself. Patton's reputation, already formidable, was cemented by this operation. Allied commanders praised the audacity and precision of the maneuver, recognizing its importance in preserving Bastogne and blunting the German offensive. Critics who might have doubted the feasibility of a winter march through hostile terrain were silenced by the results. In both military and public perception, Patton became the embodiment of bold leadership, capable of taking calculated risks with decisive results. Yet the aftermath also highlighted the immense human cost. Exhaustion, frostbite, and the physical toll on men and machines underscored the dangers inherent in such operations. The march demanded extraordinary resilience, pushing soldiers to the edge of human endurance. These realities reminded commanders and historians alike that audacity alone could not guarantee success. Meticulous planning, coordination, and the courage of individual soldiers were equally vital. As night fell over Bastogne in the days following the relief, the town began the slow process of recovery. Soldiers dug out vehicles, repaired damaged roads, and treated the wounded. Communication lines were reestablished and supply routes reopened, allowing the Third Army to consolidate its gains and prepare for further operations against retreating German forces. The immediate crisis had passed, but the lessons of speed, leadership, and endurance would resonate through the remainder of the Ardennes campaign. The relief of Bastogne, in short, was more than a tactical victory. It was a statement that bold action, executed with precision under extreme conditions, could change the course of battle. The 48-hour march had demonstrated the interplay of human determination, mechanical power, and strategic vision. For the men who marched, for those who awaited relief, and for the broader Allied effort in the Ardennes, the consequences were profound, immediate, and lasting. The relief of Bastogne had repercussions far beyond the snow-laden streets of a single Belgian town. Strategically, the operation halted the momentum of the German Ardennes offensive. Operation Volk am Rhein, designed to split the Allied lines and seize Antwerp, had been the last major gamble of a weakening German military. The rapid arrival of Patton's forces disrupted the timetable of the German advance, forcing enemy commanders to divert units, reorganize supply lines, and adopt defensive postures that slowed the offensive. What had been a potentially decisive thrust toward the heart of Belgium became a protracted struggle, buying precious time for the Allies to reinforce other sectors and mount counterattacks. The Third Army's 48-hour march became an enduring case study in military history, illustrating the impact of speed, coordination, and leadership under extreme conditions. By overcoming logistical challenges, frozen roads, mechanical breakdowns, and limited fuel, Patton demonstrated that audacity could amplify tactical advantage. Historical records confirm the scale of the achievement. Patton's columns advanced over 100 miles in 2 days, a feat unmatched in modern mechanized warfare, particularly under winter conditions and enemy fire. The maneuver required seamless integration of infantry, armor, artillery, and engineers, highlighting the importance of interbranch coordination in combined arms operations. Patton's leadership received widespread recognition. Fellow commanders and historians alike have noted his ability to act decisively when others hesitated. His insistence on speed and aggressive maneuver, often against conventional wisdom, allowed the Third Army to seize the initiative at a critical juncture. As historian Carlo d'Este notes, Patton's combination of personal charisma, audacity, and meticulous planning enabled outcomes that might otherwise have seemed impossible. Officers within the Third Army credited his leadership with inspiring extraordinary effort and maintaining cohesion under near-impossible circumstances. For the soldiers of both armies, the march reinforced stark lessons about human endurance. Men faced not only enemy fire but extreme weather, fatigue, and logistical uncertainty. Frostbite and exhaustion were constant threats, yet discipline and determination carried the units forward. Oral histories and memoirs emphasize that morale, often underestimated in planning, proved decisive. The confidence inspired by Patton's reputation and the visible progress of relief forces transformed fear into perseverance. Bastogne's defenders, isolated and low on supplies, drew strength from the knowledge that help was approaching, while German forces struggled under the psychological shock of a rapid, unexpected advance. The broader impact on the Ardennes campaign was substantial. Following Bastogne's relief, Allied forces regained the initiative, counterattacking and gradually pushing German units back toward their starting positions. The failure of Operation Wacht am Rhein marked a turning point. Germany's capacity to conduct large-scale offensives on the Western Front had been effectively exhausted. Bastogne became symbolic of resilience, audacity, and the decisive interplay of leadership and logistics, a narrative that endures in both scholarly analysis and popular memory. Contemporary reports and post-war assessments underscore the precision of the operation. General Courtney Hodges, commander of the 1st U.S. Army, lauded Patton's achievement as a masterstroke of speed and coordination that saved not only Bastogne but much of the southern Ardennes sector. Patton himself remained characteristically modest, emphasizing the effort of his officers and soldiers over personal glory. Yet history has consistently recognized the march as a defining example of leadership under pressure, demonstrating that carefully calculated audacity can transform the outcome of a desperate situation. The consequences of the march extended beyond the military sphere. The psychological impact on Allied forces reinforced the belief that even in the harshest conditions, determination, preparation, and swift action could prevail. Stories of the rapid relief spread through units still engaged along the front, inspiring confidence and morale. For the German High Command, the episode served as a sobering lesson. Intelligence failures, underestimation of enemy initiative, and over-reliance on assumption could result in dramatic setbacks, even in offensives carefully planned over months. By December 20, 1944, the immediate crisis at Bastogne had ended, but the legacy of the 48-hour march endured. It remained a touchstone of military planning and leadership, cited in studies of operational art, combined arms coordination, and crisis management. The town itself, though scarred by battle, became a symbol of endurance, and Patton's daring maneuver became a defining moment of the Ardennes campaign. The relief of Bastogne, therefore, was not merely a tactical success, but a turning point in the broader war. It demonstrated how audacious leadership, precise execution, and human resilience could intersect to reshape the battlefield. With Bastogne secure, the Allies could stabilize their lines, prepare counteroffensives, and begin the long push to expel German forces from Belgium and Luxembourg. The events of those 2 frigid days left an indelible mark on history, confirming Patton's place as one of the most decisive commanders of World War II. The 48-hour march to Bastogne stands as a testament to the power of audacity tempered by preparation. In the frozen Ardennes, where snow and ice seemed as deadly as enemy fire, the interplay of leadership, human endurance, and mechanized might converged to achieve the impossible. Patton's decision to strike swiftly, to act decisively where caution might have prevailed, changed not only the fate of a single town, but the trajectory of an entire campaign. History often measures victory in numbers and territory, but Bastogne reminds us that courage and resolve are equally decisive. Soldiers endured cold, hunger, and exhaustion, yet continued to move forward because leadership inspired them to believe that their efforts mattered. Engineers braved icy roads to keep supply lines open. Infantrymen cleared obstacles while under threat of artillery. Tank crews pressed forward despite the mechanical hazards of winter. Every individual, Every decision compounded into a larger force capable of defying expectation. The German commanders, confident in the isolation of Bastogne, were confronted with the unpredictable consequences of audacity. Their setback illustrates a timeless lesson in warfare as in life. Rigid assumptions can be shattered by decisiveness and speed. The psychological impact on both sides' hope restored for the Allies. Doubt sown among the Germans was as significant as the material gains. Bastogne was saved not only by firepower, but by timing, vision, and human determination. Decades later, the march remains emblematic of leadership under pressure. It shows that even in the most daunting conditions, calculated risks, when combined with preparation and courage, can yield extraordinary results. Patton's legacy is not merely that of a bold commander, but of a man who trusted in the capabilities of his soldiers and the speed of action, transforming despair into triumph. In the quiet that followed the battle, snow continued to fall over Bastogne. The town, scarred but standing, bore witness to the endurance of men who refused to yield. The genius of command that dared to defy limits, and the enduring truth that history is often shaped by those willing to act when others hesitate. The Ardennes had tested the extremes of human endurance and strategy, and, for 2 frozen days, it had proven that the improbable could indeed be achieved.